Thanks, everybody. So I can't really introduce myself any better than Vic did already, so let's get into it. So this is how to make money fast using a Pwned PBX. You don't need to take any notes. All my slides are published on GitHub, and URL will be at the end. So there are no books. There's no videos. There's no infomercials, no high-pressure sales, no investment required. So what I'm going to show you today is, once you pwn your PBX, what the mystical question mark is. What do you actually need to do to turn a profit? I'm not going to tell you about myself. You can look me up online. So a quick mandatory disclaimer in legalese, because I'm here speaking not on behalf of my company. These views and opinions are my own and don't represent anybody else. Okay, so a lot of people know that yes, you can crack PBXs. SIPP hacking has been around for quite a while, but the missing element here is, you know, what do you actually do once you crack the PBX? And it's not just making free phone calls, right? You can actually make money fast. And it's to the point now that, you know, it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. The FBI is finally taking notice and trying to help private industry do something about it. You know, losses are now to the tune of $46.3 billion, and this is strictly based on reporting from carriers, from service providers like Verizon and AT&T and Level 3 and those types of people. So we're completely discounting some of the losses that might actually be experienced by private industry that are not reported. So it's probably way bigger than that. Some people say it's as high as $80 billion. Law enforcement's finally taken notice, and actually, I think it was November of last year, the FBI actually added 2 people to their, you know, cyber's most wanted, and they're strictly guys that were doing voice over IP fraud. All right, so here's how our story goes today. I'm going to cover a little bit of how we got here, why we have such a big problem, why the bad stuff is so easy, and I'll show you very briefly how to crack SIPP extensions for those of you that may not be familiar with it. Then we'll look at how PBX cracking actually happens, who's doing it, at least from my US-centric viewpoint, and if you have a cracked PBX, actually how to use it, how to make money fast. So the Cliff's Notes history lesson. Modern offices, right? Everybody needed a phone. We started seeing phones appearing on everybody's desk, but it was very expensive because everybody needed a hard wire from the phone company, and those extensions were really not in use very often. So people started moving to a PBX system, private branch exchange, and it was just a way to share your limited phone resources and take advantage of that you know, high number of lines that was unused. So you only have to pay for 24 lines to the phone company, but you have several hundred desk sets. It also allows people to call one another inside of your company, and you don't have to go out to the actual phone company. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of wires, a lot of maintenance, and for the poor telco guy, a lot of crawling around in closets and stuff like that. So along came IP, and we put everything in the meat grinder of IP, including voice over IP. We started connecting it to the internet. First popular with H.323, and now the voice over IP landscape is primarily dominated by the SIPP signaling protocol and RTP for carrying voice. What's interesting is that the service providers are now peering, actually they've been peering for several years, strictly over IP. TDM, the old you know, copper links in that for handing traffic between different carriers is pretty much dead, and the FCC is actually pushing the service providers to move towards a pure IP network. All right, so the move to an IP-based PBX, you know, there's a lot of motivations for businesses to do this, especially simplicity, cost savings, and features. And when you have an IP PBX, you can now choose who your phone company is. So I can get what's called a SIPP trunk, your SIPP connection, to any number of phone companies that are willing to offer you, you know, a connection over the internet. They may come in and drop a dedicated circuit with a dedicated router, whatever their business model is. But you can also hook up to cloud services. Your desk set might actually go out and register with a cloud service somewhere, so you have a virtual PBX. Unfortunately, when you connect, that's where you run into problems. So let's take a look at the SIPP protocol itself. SIPP is used for signaling the voice over IP sessions. It can be encrypted and can be sent over TLS, but there's not very many people that are doing it because, you know, certificates are complicated. You can't necessarily nail down a standard of, you know, how you're going to negotiate this connection. So, hey, it's all clear text, right? So, I mean, if you look at this, it looks a little bit like HTTP, right? It's extensible, so you've got a bunch of different headers, you know, via, from, to, all this, and you'll see, while it's not shown in the invite, you'll see response codes, very much like HTTP. You send an invite, you get a 200 OK or 180 ringing or something like that back. So obviously this means that if it's flying back and forth in clear text, you can intercept it and get data from it. You can maybe modify it while it's in flight. And if you get the media information here, SDP, maybe you can figure out how to insert yourself in that conversation or record the media or, you know, do whatever you will with this. So you're revealing an awful lot of information by using clear text SIPP. So in CarolinaCon 7, there was a talk by Tdose about SSH honeypotting, and I went home from that and got pretty excited about, well, what could I do? That was an interesting talk. So I decided I'll set up a SIPP honeypot. And I was lucky enough that one of my customers at the time was a major university on the East Coast who was also very interested in this. They had no expertise, but tons of resources and hook up to both Internet 1 and Internet 2 and said, hey, we'll set up a bunch of VMs for you, knock yourself out. So I've been running this honeypot for the last 3 years, collecting data, getting, you know, intelligence to build into some of the products that I used to support. And I used Dynea, which is a low interaction honeypot. And, you know, thinking I was going to be thorough, I set up TCP, UDP, TLS, you know, TFTP, basically the whole gambit of different protocols that SIPP could run over. But, you know, because we weren't really working with any funding, if you compromised my honeypot, it really didn't go anywhere. So you couldn't really make a free phone call anywhere. But the intelligence that we were able to collect was reflective of what the attackers were actually trying to do in order to compromise your system. You know, given that I figured people were going to be intelligent about, you know, where this IP is you know, physically, or where the IP is registered, who the IP is registered to, that they would figure out, oh, it's this university, so I'm going to try to figure out, you know, how I can scam them, like where's financial aid, bursar, security. So I set up all these extensions on the PBX, or the fictitious PBX, thinking, you know, maybe we'll get some good data out of that. Unfortunately, that didn't really work. The surprising part was there were no attacks to TCP, no attacks to TLS. I've never in 3 years seen anything hit my TFTP port. And they were only looking for 3-digit extensions, which 3-digit extensions are the most common setup if you're looking at soft PBX like Asterisk. Out of the box, it's defaulting to 3-digit extensions. And the top tool that was in use didn't even provide back any feedback to the user that it found a PBX unless you were using 3-digit extensions. So for those of you who support voice over IP systems, take that one to heart. If you've got 3-digit extensions, get rid of them. All right, so from the perspective of the honeypot, what actual SIPP methods do we see? So the SIPP method is the type of message. You'll have things like options, which are a basic health check saying, hey, are you there? What do you support? And the response back from the PBX is supposed to be, you know, I support, you know, these particular things for anchoring media, and this is how I like to send ringtones and things like that. The next thing that we'll see is an invite, which is basically, hey, establish a call to this number. And then the last is a register message. So you may send an invite, But because you're not a registered user, you haven't sent a username and password, and the system doesn't know about you, you can't really make any calls. So the register is, here's my extension, here's my password, put me in your directory, I'm going to start making phone calls now. And there are actually 14 different SIPP methods, but just these 3 are really the only ones that you'll see in SIPP cracking. So what actually happens? The first thing is an attacker will send an options message. This is your basic Nmap scan of the internet. They're just looking for any IPs that are out there that are hosting a SIPP service. So they'll send an options message and get a response. And when they get a response, then they'll send an initial probe. And this is, I'm just going to try to make a call to see if perhaps it's wide open, misconfigured, what have you. If it works, hey, great, they're going to start sending traffic. In most cases, it doesn't. So then they start sending register messages. And they'll try multiple passwords, and it's purely brute force, 100, 101, 102, blah, 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 all the way through their password list, usually numeric, and then you might see them switching back and forth to text. And so, okay, fine, they figured out the password is 102. The next thing they're going to do is try to make a call to a test number. And that test number is usually a burner phone or maybe another VoIP extension that they cracked somewhere else. So they actually know, this is like the verification check. They actually know that this thing can make calls and get somewhere. And in the case of my honeypot, because it didn't have a trunk hooked up to it, right, the calls were going nowhere, but they didn't know that there was no trunk. They just figured, well, I didn't get the right prefix to make my calls. So you'll see 001, so they're trying to make an international call, 01, that didn't work, so now I'm going to stick an 8 in front of it. Maybe that's what I need to do to get an outside line. Then they try a 9, and hey, magically that worked, so I can now make outbound calls. So a recent example, this is taken right from the Dianea logs on the honeypot. You'll see that multiple invite messages, and in this case, the IP address was registered to Palestinian Internet Services. The crazy part about this is, you and I would think, well, I'm going to hack a PBX. I'm going to go through Tor. I'm going to do, I'm going to do something to obfuscate who I am and where I come from. Don't even care. Go to Palestine. So what are you going to do? Go to Palestine and demand your money? It's not going to happen, right? And you can see the prefix here, 972, is actually owned by Jawal Cellular in the Palestinian territories. I wouldn't call this number if I were you, by the way. Very expensive. So obviously, one of the things that you can get from running the honeypot is figuring out, what are the actual tools that people are using. And again, just like just like with the IP addresses, these attackers don't even really care, it seems, if you know what they're running. So SIPP vicious, I mean, it has a default user agent string that says friendly-scanner, and you'll see it show up all the time. Now, obviously, my honeypot data is based on a very US-centric view, and I've talked to other VoIP security professionals internationally, and they see slightly different things based on where their attackers are coming from and where they're based. But for the most part, SIPP vicious has remained, since it came out, I think 4 or 5 years ago, the top tool for cracking VoIP extensions. The interesting part was, I gave a talk similar to this at the Communications Fraud Control Association last year, and at that point in time, 99% of all the hits on my honeypot were coming from SIPP vicious. Now, it has fallen to, what's that, 76%? And this VAX SIPP user agent represents the bulk of the increase in different tools. VAX SIPP user agent is just the user agent string that's sent by a particular voice over IP API that's commercially available. So people are actually buying a SIPP API and writing quick scripts that will just do all their scanning and credential cracking for them. SIPP CLI is another example of one of those. And this one actually cracks me up. iBeam. You can get a number of different free SIPP clients, but for some reason, there is an ecosystem of these VoIP hackers that exchange tools and tips and all that. they're all using the same like circa 2007 version of iBeam back when you needed to install an actual license key, and somebody cracked it and just everybody's using it. And the hysterical part was I got a call from a customer because my VoIP security appliance was blocking some of their customers from registering to their service. And they're like, oh my God, you got to turn the signature off. I'm like, but the only people that use that is fraudsters. It's like, yeah, but we point our customers to go download their SIPP clients to a Where's forum in Turkey. It's like, it was a Turkish telecom company, and they're actually pointing their real customers to a Where's site. All right, I give up. So I added an option to disable that signature. The interesting part is 0.4% of basically each of these tools in the sample, Metasploit, like hardly ever saw it at all, but Metasploit I think is probably one of the better tools for cracking SIPP because it's nearly impossible to block it with signatures. All of the fields are randomized, so if you're looking for specific user agents and things, yeah, not going to do it. It randomizes the numbers that are being called. Basically, any identifying field is removed. So if we look at the countries that were actually hitting me, this was another thing that shocked me. It changed this year. It used to be that, you know, sorry, I'll back up here. Anyways, real attribution is hard to prove, right? Because you can mask your IP address. Top 6 sources, basically top 6 source countries represent 97% of the total data set. So there's obviously a few top countries that are doing this type of hacking. All right, this is the point I was going to get to. So in 2013, 65% of voice fraud was coming from Israel and the Palestinian territories. Why that is, I don't know. You know, it's one of those things. Different you know, natural language forums. People exchange tips. People you know, meet up. Their local security get-togethers or whatever, and say, hey, I'm doing this. I'm making great money. You should try it too. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why it's happening. It's also very difficult to go after somebody who's actually in Palestine. But the crazy part was it fell from 2013 and 2014 and went from 65 down to 23%. There's a reason why that happened, I think. Yeah, so the question was, how can I tell that it was really coming from Palestine and not just like a proxy or a relay? That's it? Yeah. Honestly, I can't tell, but the thing that was sort of the indicator that it really was coming from Palestine was the fact that they didn't seem to take any measures to mask their IP address. They were using a script kiddie tool, frankly, without bothering to change the user agent. So it was one of those, like, you know, the data just sort of pointed to the fact that they really didn't care. And I will tell you that my suspicion is, even though there were servers that had IP registries from Israel, they're probably coming from Palestine anyways. You know, they would probably take an extra special joy cracking server in Israel and, you know, using an Israeli resource. It's kind of ironic for them. So the crazy part here was in 2013, US sources were only 18%, and it went up to 35.7% this year. Anybody have any theories as to why that might have happened? I wouldn't think so, because if you're going to be committing this type of crime, why would you move to the US where the NSA might monitor you more? Can you raise your hand? I can't see you. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I would think it might be the other way around, right? If you're going to crack a US resource, maybe you're going to undergo more scrutiny, but yeah, exactly. Well, I'll show you my theory, and this is what the numbers are sort of telling me. 72% of the US hits were from cloud providers, right? So your Amazon, your Rackspace, all that sort of stuff. So if you're going to be cracking a US server and you're coming from Palestine and you're brute forcing, so you're sending lots of challenges really quickly, it might make sense to put your cracking resources closer to the system you're trying to crack, right? So I think they're maybe getting a little bit more intelligent, trying to obfuscate who they really are, where they're coming from, and trying to build a little bit more efficiency into it. So if we look at, this is a volumetric map, and I'll give credit to my buddy Dwight, who's actually a GIS researcher who put this together for me. So traffic by volume shows a similar story as far as the top countries. You know, you've got France in here, in Germany. Missouri was like the weird outlier. I'm like, and it may be difficult to see, but there's some little shadowing. There's a few other states in here, and then Missouri's just like off the charts. And the only thing I could attribute that to was that there was this one dude who was really, really interested in cracking my server. I don't know why. But there seemed to be several different cloud providers that happen to have, you know, servers in the Kansas City area. It's very difficult to see because the countries are so small and it's all relative here to size. But Palestine's over here to the right. Yeah. Yeah. They're like the Russian Carters of the VoIP fraud world, I guess. And that's why I'm talking about it. You know, and it's not a you know, it's not a cultural or a country slam or anything like that. It's not meant to be personal. It's just what the data is showing, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I kind of missed your point. Oh, right. Exactly. Your point's very well received. So I was just in Israel for a couple of weeks, and I was surprised at the number of Russians that were actually in Israel. Yeah, there's an awful lot of them. I think, and maybe you know better than me, but I thought perhaps it was when the Iron Curtain fell in Russia, all the Russian Jews said, hey, let's move to Israel. You know, I don't know. So, yeah, I'm noticing that my slides seem to be chopped off just a little bit. So let's cover really quickly how to actually use SIPP Vicious, which is as I said, the top SIPP hacking tool. So SIPP Vicious is actually a number of smaller tools. If you go to Backtrack, it's under the Pentest VoIP SIPP Vicious directory. So the first tool is SVMap, and this is basically your Nmap of the VoIP world. So you're basically going to give it an IP address or an IP range, and it'll just go out and find every device that responds back and give you the user agent, so you can kind of focus. If I'm going to use a particular exploit, you know, what is my target? Now, I'll warn you, there are some systems that will reply back with fictitious user agent names in an attempt to try to foil that, and there are some manufacturers that just don't respond to options at all. So what you can do is feed SVMap a option, so it won't use the options message, it'll use an invite method, and you get slightly better results with that. So once you've found all the SIPP servers, then you want to use the SVWAR routine, which actually does your enumeration. So I found something, I'm going to try making a call to, or a register to a number of different extensions, and based on the response code, either send me your password, or yeah, that extension doesn't exist. Now I know exactly what extensions are there for me to start cracking. The interesting part is once in a while you'll get one that'll come back with no auth, and that just means, yeah, I'm here, you can register to me, but I'm not going to challenge you for a password. So that's the holy grail right there. Bam, register and start making calls. Again, the invite method may provide you with better results than the register method. Oh, and I will warn you, if you're trying to do SIPP vicious scans from behind a DSL or cable modem, in many cases their handling for the NAT pinholes for SIPP are pretty crappy, quite frankly. So prepare to reset your DSL modem or whatever multiple times before you finish the scan. And then lastly, credential cracking. So SIPP vicious SV crack, you feed it the extension number and then either a password list, or you can give it the range of numbers that you want to use, basically the numbers that a user would punch in to authenticate at their handset. So you'll see an awful lot of the small business systems in that just use numerics. A lot of the like the MSOs, the cable vendors that also bundle VoIP services, have moved to very complex passwords though. And of course, if you're lucky enough to find a system out there with an open web interface or perhaps running some APIs, those things are nice juicy targets. A lot of small businesses will have a single admin that wants to be able to handle the phone system from home, so they leave this open. And of course, old school works too. If you can call up a voicemail system and say, I'm this user, and then start punching in numbers, you're probably going to guess somebody's PIN code. We tend to pick non-random PIN codes, right? Everybody has a little pattern that they follow, and there are actual sweatshops that are set up in some countries like the Philippines, and they will sit there all day just, okay, I dialed this voicemail system and I got a prompt that sounded like this. Oh, that's a Nortel Meridian system, and by default it wants X number of digits as the code, and then they'll just sit there hammering at it until they get an extension, and then they can start forwarding calls to whatever high cost destination. All right, I'm like way behind here, so let me speed this up. All right, let's get to the good stuff. How to actually make money fast. All right, so there's a few keys to successful fraud that are not technical. Timing. If you're going to compromise somebody's PBX system and then generate traffic for fraud, do it on a weekend when they're not going to notice that maybe their phones are ringing or maybe their phone system is a little slow or doing something weird. Get paid weekly. Right, so most customers are only billed on a monthly basis. So if you can commit your fraud, get paid right away, you're going to be able to get away with your money. Consider laws and contracts. So take advantage of high price differences. So if I'm going to get money calling to someplace like Africa, a very high cost destination, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. Take advantage of the price differential. Call the most expensive place you can possibly call to get the highest bang for your buck right away. And what a lot of people don't realize is there are scenarios where providers or customers are forced to pay. So I make a call to somewhere in Africa, that African telco goes back to my telephone company, we'll say AT&T, and says, oh yeah, by the way, you owe me $90,000 for the calls you made this weekend. AT&T, because of a lot of the contractual agreements in international law, is required to pay that. So they have to pay the $90,000, and then they'll come back to you and say, you owe me $90,000, and you're like, I don't have that. Or you take them to court and say, I'm not going to pay that. You should have been protecting the phone system a little better. And then, of course, location. So cross-jurisdictional boundaries, go to countries that have very loose or non-existent relationships with US law enforcement or whatever your country is. All right, so let's do a case study. How will I actually make money fast? So Joe here has cracked SIPP credentials using SIPP vicious, and he wants to buy more nunchucks. So what would Joe do? Okay, so the very first thing Joe is going to do is go to one of these sites like Premium World Telecom, and he's going to set up something called a premium rate service number. Now, this is sort of on the fringes of legality, but it's perfectly legal to set up a phone service that you get paid for, right? So if somebody calls you, you get to charge them however many cents a minute. The PRS numbers basically provide a number for you to dial in multiple countries, and based on the country that you dial, you will get a different share of the revenue. So for every call that comes in, you get 5, 6, 7 cents a minute, and they're nice enough to offer an IVR service for you. So you can host music or just a voice announcement or just dead air, but there's something on the other side that's answering the call. So what Joe does is he sets up the PRS service, and then he commits international revenue sharing fraud. This is the top fraud that telephony fraud managers are concerned about today. So he basically hides his IP if he really cares about not getting caught, uses his cracked PBX extension, and he makes his initial test call, just like I showed in the SIPP methods thing before. So he tries calling a burner phone or tries calling even the PRS number once, just, all right, does it work? No, it didn't. Try the prefixes. Okay, I get an outside line. And he can use a soft client or the API, or he can use something like SIPP, which is a tool used for testing telecom services. It just drives SIPP messaging. So he can use that to actually nail up calls. And hey, you know, a lot of these phone systems, if you have a soft client, they'll have like multiple line appearances. So you're allowed to nail up as many calls as you possibly can, you know, however many channels you've got on that PBX. So you're not limited to one call. You might nail up 9,000 calls to the same destination inside of a minute. I was told by one customer at a large MSO that they saw somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 in 1 minute from international revenue sharing. So this is something that can generate money really fast. So the PRS provider, the premium revenue sharing number provider, they will pay you on a weekly basis. There are some that will pay you more frequently than that, but a week tends to be about the average. And of course, given the keys to successful fraud that I gave you, Joe will use the PBX for one weekend and then walk. And he can generate $90,000 or more from that one customer, basically, you know, put them out of business when they have to go back and pay the phone company. So Joe decides that maybe that's a little bit too risky for him because he's generating traffic from his house, and you know, maybe Tor isn't so anonymous anymore, so maybe I want to get out of that game. So he decides maybe the safer thing to do is let other people make those phone calls. So the PBX has, you know, username and password credentials, and he's cracked those. If you're going to get SIP trunking services from a telco, some of them will actually give you a username and password that your PBX has to register with so you can send your calls to them. So this looks legitimate, or may look legitimate, if he says, yeah, in order to send calls to me, you need to use a username and password. So what Joe actually does is he goes to one of these wholesale markets that will actually allow you to sell transit services. So you say, you know, if you send calls to me, I'll direct your calls to Africa or wherever, and I'm only going to charge you 5 cents a minute, whereas everybody else in the market is charging you 7 cents a minute. So from a telecom looking to transit their traffic to Africa, that looks like a great deal, right? So, you know, they hook up with Joe's wholesale service. He routes a bunch of traffic to Africa, and then all of a sudden, a couple days later, their service just stops working. You know, they may have paid Joe already, and you know, they get ripped off. So from Joe's perspective, it's easy. It's most of the money and none of the headache of actually generating the RSF traffic himself. The thing with these wholesale markets is they tend to tolerate some shady characters. The wholesale markets are very cutthroat, and you're literally down to fractions of a cent. So if somebody comes out and says, I can undercut everybody by 1 or 2 cents, sometimes these people are willing to turn a blind eye. And these are not, your AT&Ts or Verizons. These are the people that AT&T and Verizon would hand off their traffic to, and their only business is taking calls from point A to point B. They don't have any subscribers. They are purely about sending VoIP calls around the world. All right, so this one is not necessarily needing a PBX. This is just another way you can make money fast. So you've set up your PRS number, and any calls coming to that number you're going to get a revenue share for. Wingiri is actually a Japanese term because this fraud scheme was actually seen in Japan at first. And basically all it means is you're going to send somebody a single ring call. So you've dialed their number, and as soon as you hear it ringing, you hang up. So from their perspective, they see a missed call, right? And there are a number of exchanges, NPA ranges, that look like they're in the North American numbering plan, but they're actually in the Caribbean. So you look at it and it's like, oh, that's a 236 number. That's, I don't know where that is, but let me call and find out because it's not going to cost me anything, right? Wrong. It just costs you several bucks to call it. You'll also see the SMS spam schemes where it's like, hey, you just won something, or call this number, and you figure, I don't have anything to lose. So you call the number, and then you get nailed. All right, and then the last one, Tdose is actually sort of a new scheme that's come out last couple of years. Telephony denial of service. Everybody's heard about DOS attacks, where you just hammer somebody with SYN messages or what have you. Tdose is, as it would imply, you're actually making phone calls and tying up the phone system. This can be used for fraud. It's being seen in multi-vector DOS attacks, especially like on banks and stuff. They'll Tdose the bank's incoming lines so customers can't call them. Then they'll DOS their website, and then there'll be a low and slow attack where they'll go in and compromise a database or what have you. But they can't make calls out, they can't receive calls, and Tdose is tying everything up. The other vector for this, though, is extortion. There are online forums similar to the Carter forums where people are exchanging loan information. So you go to cash your paycheck on payday at one of these cash or check cashing centers, and there's a shady person there who's selling your information that, hey, they cashed your check, they loaned you some money, what have you, and maybe you're behind on your loan. So a extortionist will basically call you at work and say, I'm going to tie up your phone system unless you pay what we're owed, and maybe it's $50, maybe it's $75. Here's the account, send the money now. And they do it at work because you're going to be embarrassed if the phone system gets tied up, and then when somebody finally answers, they go, yeah, Joe Smith owes us money and he's behind on his payments, and oh yeah, by the way, he's got a drug problem. They can say anything. So unfortunately, a lot of people end up paying, and they do look at employment information, so they'll target somebody who works at a hospital, at a lawyer's office, at a doctor's office. They're looking for small businesses. They're looking for places where maybe your reputation is important if you're going to be working there, because they know that type of attack will be effective. And of course, if you just want to be nefarious and DOS somebody's phone line, it's fun too. So this particular type of attack is actually the last 2600 that just came out, has one method of running a Tdose attack. There's a couple different options here. So I personally use SIPP. I have a customized script to do the SIPP registration and then send a bunch of calls, and that's published on my GitHub. link at the end. It's based off of register invite scenario I got from this website. This guy's got an awful lot of SIPP scripts that are pretty handy for testing. You can feed it multiple cracked credentials for registration and then drive calls from there. Now, of course, the script can be modified, but it really depends on what type of fraud scheme you're running here. So if you want to do an international revenue sharing fraud to generate the most amount of money, you're probably going to want to make the initial call and then leave the call nailed up. So just leave it open as long as you possibly can, burn up as many minutes. For Wayne Geary, you can modify it so that as soon as you receive a 180 ringing, hang up the phone right away. So bam, there's your missed call. Wait for answer. For either you can wait for an answer or you can just keep sending calls repetitively to generate your Tdose. And then it's really up to you whether you want to play any audio when they answer or just have dead air. All right, so demo time.
We actually had this happen at our work, and they said all the calls would go to Malaysia.
Yeah, that's not surprising. All right, let's see if I can't figure out how to, oh, there we go. All right, so this is just my backtrack setup. It's an old VM. Don't judge because I'm not on Kali or anything. And then I'm a personal fan of Asterisk now just because it's a very lightweight PBX, has a nice web GUI, and really easy to set up. It's all like menu-driven install. Uh-oh, battery's running low. Hey, I got 17 minutes. I'm not going to talk for that long. All right, so basically all I'm going to do is call SIPP and direct traffic to the PBX IP address, and SIPP can take in something called a scenario file. And you know what? I got to change my. Oh, crap. Demo fail already, right? All right, all better. All right, so I'm just going to run this. You can't actually see the SIPP client. So I have a X-Lite client running on my laptop. I'm just going to go over here and hit enter. Oh, you know, it helps if you start up the SIPP client to begin with. Account is not enabled. Go to account settings. That's where I am. Okay, it's on host only. There we go. Okay. All right, so what you can't see is on the right side, I've got like 4 different incoming call dialogues that have popped up. And as soon as I try to answer any of them, here we go. It just keeps coming and coming. And I'm like, decline, 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 and it just keeps popping up. So you can see I'm generating messages extremely quickly. Register, invite, and the 180 is the actual ringing. So no matter what, I'm just like hanging up, hanging up, hanging up, and they just keep coming in. Now, I will say that, let me kill this. Really? Yeah, it's becoming a thing, and especially with the financials. They love doing it to financials. Yeah. It wasn't a collector. It was a fictitious collector. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, no, I will say that if you're going to do Tdose, something like Google account seems like the way to go, right? Because anybody can set up a Google account and you're pseudo-anonymous. The only problem with that is that Google's actually pretty smart. And if you start sending a high call rate to them, they'll just like start putting limits on it. So you can get through maybe 2 or 3 calls a minute, and then they go, yeah, no, I don't think so. This is automated, and you're not a good guy. So really the way to go is to go with one of the commercial services that will charge you maybe a couple of cents per call, or just get a cracked PBX and run it through somebody else's PBX, because those people are paying a premium for a commercial SIP trunking service, and their calls are going to complete. All right, so that was option 1 using SIPP, and then as I said, option 2, which is outlined in the latest 2600 magazine, actually has you set up Asterisk now, and the way Asterisk can generate calls is through a .call file, and you actually tell it what trunk you want to generate the call on. So you tell it, the SIP channel, and you can spoof your caller ID. So you can tell it, I want to look like I'm coming from here. You can do the same thing with SIPP if you edit the scenario file. And this is the number I want to call to. So it's very, very easy. And that is how Joe gets rich quick. That's my GitHub. So I've got the scenario files as well as a presentation up there. All right, any questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, so the bank can't reach them, or even if they become aware of what's going on, they can't reach the bank either. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's very good point. That's certainly the other side of the Tdose attacks. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.